Today we are talking about what makes a flowage different than a natural lake. The most informational vlog on the internet to help you catch more fish. What is going on, guys? We're coming back with Tom Talk number 3. This is, what are we talking about today? Today we are talking about what makes a flowage different than a natural lake. I posed the question. Actually, I got a whole bunch of contacts through Facebook, text message, email about, guys either struggling on a flowage or struggling on a natural lake and kind of, asking a question to what is the difference? How does one fish differently than the other one? How to fish set up differently, stuff like that. So you guys chimed in with some questions and we are gonna answer them. I'm here with my good friend and Chippewa Flowage fishing guide, Pete Rich today.
What's going on, guys?
Together we spend pretty much every day on the flowage. I do a little bit more mixing it up probably, and I'll fish a lot more clear lakes for multi-species fishing. Pete does a ton of musky fishing on the flowage, so he's gonna help answer a lot of those musky fishing questions that you guys have regarding fishing on flowages. So we're gonna dig right into it. This is something I want to do more. I want you guys to ask questions and we will answer them as best we can. So as this is going along, think of some more questions. It doesn't just have to be about flowage, it can be about anything. I want you guys to control what goes on here on the Tom Talks, and I want you guys to get the most out of it. So with that being said, we're gonna dig right into it. The first question you guys asked was, how does water level fluctuation affect fish movements throughout the season?
For me, I would say on, using the Chippewa Flowage, the example where we just went through a pretty substantial drawdown, I don't think it does, Tom. I mean, obviously, if the lake's 4 foot down, there's parts of the water that the fish couldn't be on, say they could be in the spring. That's just the obvious side of a drawdown, is you're gonna eliminate some shallow water. But as far as, how does it affect fish movements, I've never seen it much. Have you?
No, I mean, if a fish wants to be in 8 feet of water, 8 feet of water still exists if the lake's 7 feet down.
Absolutely. We found that trolling this fall. 13 feet this year was 13 feet last year.
Yeah.
Just further out the structure as the water came down.
Yeah, and if a lot of you guys are coming to the flowage maybe once a year, maybe it's like in July, and most years it's full pool, and you come up on a year where the lake's, a few feet down and you seem to struggle, more than likely it's just a pattern that's, a prevalent pattern that you're not on, or something's different. But as far as, fishing being difficult when water's down, I don't really believe in that. If anything, I think less water, there's less available structure, and I actually think it makes it easier a lot of times, especially if fish are in a deep water pattern. So
absolutely. And another thought too is, I think guys kind of tie that in with current and, or is that one of our questions?
Yeah, which actually brings us into the next question. How do fish relate to current breaks on a flowage? And actually, the Chippewa Flowage, the primarily flowage we fish, is it's a 16,000 acre lake.
Yep.
With one small to medium sized river going in and kind of going out on the other end. But I don't really see current being I don't focus on current that much.
No, neither do I.
Now the one thing, there's a couple different kinds of current. Obviously there's current like most of us think about, like in a river or stream, stuff like that, flowing through a body of water, and then there's wind driven current. And wind, current or wind, however you want to say it, is big on shallow water fisheries.
Absolutely.
Wind is a major force on a shallow water pattern. It just it doesn't really matter what you're fishing for, it seems like, whether it's walleyes, muskies, crappies, anything. Fish in shallow water systems react very positively to wind. They
do. When it comes to muskies, I think anybody who referred to these questions in the Chippewa Flowage, and we'll talk about that, is you think about current. What's going to create current, and that's going to be your neck downs. Bridge, Hay Creek Narrows, 2 of the biggest neck downs in the entire lake. I mean, there's been one time when they were drawing the lake down 2 years ago that there was even any kind of noticeable current in Hay Creek Narrows. So I think there's such little current in the flowage that you can take that, you can wipe that out of your equation. But what Tom's talking about in wind is very important. And for me personally, when I'm musky fishing, maybe you can talk about this if you've seen this in walleyes. Everybody wants to fish the upwind side of structure. And I think you are going to have your most active fish on the upwind side of structure. Say you got a south wind, you want to hit that south facing break line. However, if it allows it on a spot and it's not a shoreline, I've got my biggest fish on the upwind, on the downside of the wind. You know, where that water's washing across the top of a break and you get that washout on the backside, that is more than likely where you're going to find your biggest muskies relating to a wind-blown piece of structure.
Yeah, and if wind-blown, it'd have to be a pretty shallow spot to see a noticeable effect at that. But it's similar to, like, let's say you're walleye fishing a river. You know, a lot of times, you know, your actual up, you know, your highest current, like let's say, and you're fishing a river that comes down, it's got a high spot here, a point comes down the other side. Very rarely are you fishing that lead current side, actually. Okay. You're fishing the back,
the eddy.
The pocket of it that coming over that point. You know, you're basically looking for bait coming up, and these fish are staged up here, and they're just coming up off that, you know, off the lack of current pocket, coming up into the current and to feed. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same scenario there.
Absolutely. And like I said, you still want to fish that upwind side of the current where that wave's pounding into that point, pounding into that bar. There's going to be a lot of active fish there when it comes to muskies on a big lake. But don't forget about that downwind side.
Yeah.
You know, that pocket, that eddy that's created on the back side of that piece of structure. And it might not be major, but I know when I've hit some of those pieces of structure and I make a bomb cast, maybe fishing the upwind side of it, and I get to that downwind side, that's typically where almost all my biggest fish come in a wind situation.
Yeah, so to really wrap this question up, you know, if you're on the lake and you're thinking about current, you know, if you're trying to, you know, see how current relates, you know, to what you're trying to do, don't focus on current as much as focus on which way that, you know, if you have a big wind blowing for 5 days,
that's huge.
Think of which way that wind's been blowing, and you know, say you got a big south wind for 5 days. You know, you're looking at stuff on that north shoreline saying, man, the wind's been pounding in here for 5 days. So that's a natural current, you know, built up for a period of time, and that's, you know, it absolutely piles fish up.
Absolutely. What do we got next?
Next question, water temp. Oh no, next question. Do all inlets hold walleyes in the spring? This isn't really exclusively a flowage question, but flowages do have more inlets.
Yep.
And it's, you know, whether it's kind of a current question. Obviously, walleyes like to spawn in current. There's always going to be more fish spawning in the main lake than there is in any river. Although rivers might have higher concentrations just for the area, there's always going to be more fish spawning in the middle of the lake. And since this is, you know, a walleye question, we'll do some musky stuff in here too. But typically in the spring where you do have an inlet, you also have a big north-facing bay in the flowage.
Which warms up first.
Which warms up first. So a lot of times that's going to be, you know, a spot where you're going to have a lot of life, whether it's crappies, walleyes, muskies, bluegills. I mean, everything wants to be in that warm water. Yep. So those north bays, just, you know, whether they have a small inlet and there's actually any kind of flow coming through there or not, it's just an area where there's a lot of life going on in those early months.
I couldn't agree more. There's nothing for me to add.
Yeah, there's nothing to really add on that one. But the next one, water temp in late spring, how does that affect walleye location? So this is kind of flowage, specific, just because walleyes will move around differently in different bodies of water. But, you know, walleyes are going to spawn at water temps between like 42 and let's say 48 degrees, kind of peak. Most of the time in northern Wisconsin here, our spawn's done. Especially on the flowage by the time the fishing season opens. But you know, a lot of times these fish aren't going to wander very far. Once they get done spawning, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to go binge feed in warm water. And a lot of times, like we were just talking about, it's a lot of these same areas that have an inlet, or, you know, it's that big north-facing bay that's pulling in perch, crappies, bluegills. You know, a lot of times those same bays have the first weed growth.
Absolutely.
And you know, a lot of guys, I think the mistake they make is just fishing way too deep in the spring.
Yeah.
And too slow. A lot of guys think of those cool water temps, and they're thinking...
That's a key, the slow part.
Yeah, the speed of it. And actually, I mean, you know, we fish faster in May and June than we do really, you know, throughout the whole season as far as, you know, making bomb casts and fishing extremely aggressively through a spot in those early months. But, yeah, so water temp in late spring, how does that affect walleye location? Typically on the flowage until that water, you know, till you're getting basically till July, you're fishing a very shallow water pattern, less than 10 feet of water. 90% of the time I'm fishing a weed bite. You know, you might be starting in those north bays, and as the weed growth kind of progresses and the water warms, you might be moving farther and farther out into the main lake. But the biggest mistake guys are doing is one fishing too deep, one fishing too slow. And yeah, I mean, those are the two biggest things I would say early in the spring. So
what do you think, Tom, taking that same scenario then and applying it to a clear natural body of water?
Yeah, so on a clear natural body of water in the spring, you know, it still is typically a shallow water bite.
But shallow water meaning 18 feet and less?
Yeah, and shallow water, in the, you know, and it all depends lake to lake. I typically call shallow water where your primary weed edge ends.
Okay.
You know, and if that's, you know, like a lot of lakes we fish, I would call a primary weed like cabbage.
Yep.
And where does cabbage end on most of our deep lakes?
I would say in that 12, 13, maybe 14-foot range.
Yeah, so let's say like 14, 15 feet's the deep side is shallow on these clear lakes. I'm not fishing much deeper than that, and most of the time I'm fishing that 8 to 13 foot range right out of the gates in the spring. You know, you're looking at water temps upper 40s to, let's say, mid 50s. That's pretty much the depths I'm fishing. You know, there is more of a there is a rock pattern obviously on other bodies of water too, but once again, that's a shallow water thing. Very rarely do I start touching water deeper than 20 feet until
it was late June this year.
Yeah, end of June, and that's pretty standard for most lakes. And same thing, you know, it's not a slow thing. It's not a throw the anchor out, wait for a bite. You're fishing very fast. Fish are active, and
It's amazing how aggressive walleye are when you fish for them aggressively. You know, they're not this. They have the myth of being this finicky fish that you got to wait out the bite and they hit so very light. Not true. The more aggressive you fish for them, the more aggressive a fish they are. They have, you know, they're a predator. They have teeth. You're not going to thumb walleye when you catch one to take the hook out. I mean, they want to hunt things down. The more aggressive I fish with Tom for these things, it blows my mind as how aggressive they are. I've caught walleye in the figure 8 with husky jerks before, so
yeah,
they're a predator and fish for them accordingly at times.
Yeah, and that question just with the late spring, you know, obviously if it's a very late spring and you're looking at ice out right around opening weekend, these fish are probably, you know, somewhere spawning, and fish spawn or walleye spawn on gravel and rock shorelines. You're going to focus a lot more on rivers that time of year, just when you have, because walleyes obviously love to spawn in rivers, but, you know, while the spawn's going on, you're looking at rock and gravel shorelines, and that's pretty much as simple as it gets, I'd say.
I think so.
So I'm sure there's some musky guys out there wondering the same thing for musky fishing. You know, if you have a late spring for musky fishing, water temps are, you know, what Memorial Weekend it is for us. So while you're looking at water temps 50 degrees,
55 on a cold year at Memorial. But you know, it's funny because everything that Tom addressed, whether it was Clearwater, whether it was the Flowage, is the exact same way you would approach the musky fishing. And yeah, they spawn in a little different cover, but by time musky season's open and you're getting that late May, those walleye are pushing in the weeds. They've abandoned the gravel for the most part, not all of them, but they're in those fresh weeds. The muskies are just finishing up their spawn in those fresh weeds. And the reason the walleye are there is food, and the reason the muskies will stay is food. And, you know, it's
life.
When the more life that's happening, the better your odds are of catching predators.
Yeah, and yeah, that really goes, you know, once all fish get done spawning, a lot of them go and gorge right away, especially predators, and, you know, life is shallow that time of year, so that's where a lot of our predator fish are. What else do we have? So, Flowages being primarily dark water fisheries, do you need to slow down and fish every inch in a spot to know if there are fish there? I'll let Pete tackle this one on the musky side, and I'll do kind of a multi-species side.
My quick answer for muskies is no. And I'll tell you a real quick story. It was July 4th weekend. Me, my dad, and my buddy Mike were out fishing, and nobody at the resort we were staying at had seen a fish for maybe 3 or 4 days. We were on the west side of the Flowage, and the water clarity was very similar to that of Mille Lacs, a real kind of green, but still you could barely see water, you know, down in like 3 feet. It was a real big algae bloom. And I'm like, screw this. And I started burning a bucktail. I stick a 43. I tell Mike and Dad, guys, I was burning. 5 casts later, Dad gets a 46 burning, and then I dumped about a 43 burning. And that pattern continued. It didn't matter on the clarity. These fish wanted things fast. I mean, you don't, when you're working a suic, you're not doing this. I mean, you're ripping it. That's the reaction on a suic. A glide bait doesn't move forward quickly, but it moves side to side quickly. That's another reaction, and it's the same with bucktails. So I am always erring on the side of fishing fast to cover water to find the active fish. If the fish aren't reacting to the speed, then I'll slow down and get a little more meticulous, but I want to find the most aggressive fish within the system, because fishing 10 spots in one day will allow me to catch more fish than fishing 2 spots thoroughly.
Yeah. And, you know, this summer is a good, you know, when we started doing a lot of heavy trolling, kind of figuring out what was working best, I was actually trolling at 5 miles an hour.
And getting ripped like crazy.
and getting bites on the Flowage at 5 miles an hour, which is cooking if you're trolling. So with that being said, no, for muskies, you absolutely do not have to slow down. Obviously, there's times a year.
Water temp will dictate speed.
Where you do slow down. But the generic answer, no, you do not have
June, not a great time for speed. July, August, and especially September. I mean, in September, it's not just the flowage. September, I was on, a couple other chains in the Hayward area that have dark water, and I was getting bit every time. My clients physically couldn't go fast enough to get bit, and they were following the slow retrieve bucktail, but they weren't eating it. They would pull off before the figure eight. I'm going as fast as humanly possible, and every single one of them ate in the figure eight, coming in 100 miles an hour. And
they can eat a bait faster than you can reel.
Oh my God,
put it that way. Now with multi-species fishing, I'll throw it back to like walleyes or smallmouth here. I would say I absolutely still fish faster than most guys do on a walleye pattern, even on dark water. I don't fish any more aggressively on clear water.
Yeah, I mean, you're not like ripping crankbaits or anything.
No, I mean, trolling in the summertime for walleyes, 2.2, 2.4, 2.5, you can catch fish at all those speeds, which is on the high end of kind of walleye trolling. Snap jigging, I'll do a ton of snap jigging early in the year, and I'm throwing 1/2 and 3/8 ounce heads in 5 feet of water and catching fish. I fish extremely fast. And the other thing to be said about fishing fast for multi-species fishing on the flowage is, where's I going with this? I just had a really clear point in my mind. Oh yeah, so very rarely from a walleye standpoint will I pull up on a walleye spot that I want to fish, and I'll see a cluster of 10 fish. Now there's a lot of reasons for that. The primary one is that it's shallower water that you're looking for, and you don't normally see that big cloud of walleyes. But because these fish aren't all right here and right where they are, I fish fast throughout a whole spot to kind of pick out, cover a lot more water than I would just crawling through a spot. Now, a lot of times if I catch 2 walleyes on this point and I fish kind of this bay and nothing, then I catch a walleye off this stump, I might go back through that spot and let's say throw out some slip bobbers or put on a jig and a minnow instead of a jig and a plastic or a jig and a crank and see if I can't coax a few more of those fish into biting. But yeah, I mean, basically what me and Pete just ran you through, no, it's not a slow down thing. Now with multi-species fishing, and I think musky fishing too, a lot of guys are just blown away by the sheer amount of water, which makes it tough to, they just want to, get on a walleye or get on a fishy looking shoreline and just crawl through it because it all looks so good, and they might end up a mile that way, instead of, but only time's going to tell you driving down a shoreline, and you're only time's going to tell you like this is the fishy spot and this is the fishy spot. And
that's the size of when getting to the Chippewa Flowage, which might be different, say, than like the Guile Flowage or I don't know, the Minong Flowage, if there's such a
Turtle
thing.
Flambeau.
Turtle Flambeau. And so you have these, the Chippewa Flowage has 233 miles of shoreline. And it has an adult population that's, maybe somewhere in that 1 adult to every 5 to 8 acre range. And that's a lot of water to cover. So you want to be efficient in the way you do it. And, touching on what Tom said with the walleye too, is, and I know guys do a lot of slip bobbering during the summer, and Tom's got a great video that you guys should watch over and over, because there's a way to fish fast, even with slip bobbers. Efficiently, that's exactly right. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this, sometimes with musky fishing, it's lure speed and boat speed together. With walleye fishing, because they can't, move as quickly as a musky can, it might just be deciding
when you're done fishing a spot.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, it didn't happen for 2 minutes. We're not going to sit here anchored for 30 minutes and wait these fish out. Find the fish that are aggressive and fish for those fish.
Yep, exactly. What else do we have? Do you exclusively fish shallow water and the flowage?
No.
Yeah, absolutely not. But it is in a time capsule, and we've talked about this a lot before. Just how guys have a tendency, from a musky standpoint, we'll start there, but to put the boat in 8 feet of water, cast to 3 feet of water, and if you don't see a fish in the week, the fish weren't biting.
Yep. Not true.
Yeah, absolutely not true. These fish use, the entire lake essentially, just to make it simple. But the one plus side about fishing a flowage is that if your bait's 10 feet down over 20 feet of water,
you're in the strike zone for everything.
At most, you're 15 feet away from the fish, and very rarely are they on bottom. In the summer months. So, most of the summer, do you feel good telling people how far down you were trolling?
Oh yeah, so and that is one thing. Not to get too technical, because I'm not a biologist, and Max will probably watch this and call me and tell me I'm an idiot. But as the water warms up, the plant matter, it's not a natural lake bed, so you have mud, you have decomposing roots and stuff like that are actually absorbing oxygen during the warm water periods. So muskies aren't going to be on the bottom. They also aren't going to be smack dab on the surface when you're getting water temps, say, in the 75-degree range. So it kind of pushes those fish right into a sweet spot. You find that sweet spot, and I had the best July and August I've ever had musky fishing. And, you know, to give you the
How many fish did you catch in less than 5 feet of water?
Zero. And
So no.
how many people were catching fish on the flowage in that time frame? Not very many. It was, these fish aren't 20 feet down. They're in that same depth. You know, I never ran a lure this summer deeper than 10 feet. I think that's the easiest way, because like Tom just said, you know, the furthest you're ever going to be away from a fish is 15 feet. Well, the warmer the water is, the more their metabolism is boosted up, and their strike zone gets bigger and bigger and bigger, to where if you think of, you know, say you have an 18-foot boat, and your lure comes by the nose of the boat, and there's a muskie at the transom of your boat, he knows that's there, especially with the water being ramped up. So as long as you're in the strike zone, and it's a big strike zone, just don't get below the fish. Try to concentrate top 10 feet of the water column, and you will be in the strike zone.
Yep. Yeah, and this isn't like you're fishing 10 feet of water. This might be you're fishing 18 feet of water,
Absolutely.
but your bait's 5 feet down.
Yep.
So yeah, from a multi-species standpoint, do you exclusively fish shallow water on the flowage? I will say this: you have a much higher tendency to catch a ton of short walleyes the deeper you're fishing, especially in the
I can attest to that.
especially in the summer months. I can attest to that. Everybody who's fished the flowage can attest to that.
That's when you get the whole, there's nothing but 9 and 12-inch walleye in this lake. Not true story.
Yep.
But they, for some reason, are deep.
Yep. And you know, I'm a very firm believer in the fact that you don't have to fish much deeper than 12 feet the entire season if you're targeting keeper walleyes in the flowage. Now, you might not be catching 30, 40 a day.
Yeah.
You might be looking at catching 5 to 10 fish a day. But you will find more quality on the average up shallow than you will at deeper depths. And you just got to fish fast to the shallows. These fish, it's not like they're waiting until night to feed. It's not like they're only feeding at the crack of dawn. Fish fast. You know, I'm a huge pro trolling guy out there.
Absolutely.
Just because you can cover so much water, find some fish, and go back and fish them later. I'd say the sweet spot, just kind of addressing this from a crappie standpoint. In the peak summer months, I'm fishing a lot of 12 to 17 feet of water. That's kind of the sweet spot. Very rarely for anything will I fish deeper than 17 feet of water out there, besides very late in fall. But the flowage, it is just a shallow body of water. The average depth is probably, 13, 14 feet?
There's zero thermocline. You might get a couple old lake beds that develop a thermocline, but you're typically not being, everything's above the thermocline. I mean, 18 feet of water on, say, a lake like Coudray, that's shallow.
Yep.
I mean, that's one of the beauties of fishing the flowage, is that everything can be within the strike zone. It's just up to you to stay active to find what that water depth is for that time period that you're there, and don't settle for, it was just bad. Fish got to eat.
Yep.
Fish have to eat, and in the summer months, every fish is feeding more than they do the rest of the entire year. So that's where you guys have to stay active and continue to find different ways to catch them. If you caught fish one year on a brush pile in 12 foot of water walleye fishing, and the next year you've been there for 3 days and you haven't caught a fish, they're not there.
Yep.
If you haven't caught one in 45 minutes, they're not there, let alone 3 days.
Don't sell your soul to a spot.
So what's this last one here? How do fish migrations change throughout the course of the year on a flowage versus a natural body of water?
Yes. Yeah, so it's actually, fish are fish are fish.
Agreed.
That's something I tell
Doesn't matter
myself.
if it's Minnesota, Green Bay, or Spider Lake.
They all have the same seasonal migrations, just it's biological.
Yeah.
And
driven by water temperature and,
and it's
insects and all that little stuff.
Now, the structure they relate to might vary between lake to lake.
Yeah.
So let's say, we're talking about walleyes here. I'm going to start out fishing shallow. Shallow is relative to what body of water you're fishing, but I'm going to be starting out shallow in the months of May and June. As the summer progresses, these fish are moving progressively, typically deeper, more into the main body of water, just following bait fish that are moving out of the shallows and going deeper as the summer progresses. And, let's say I'm fishing weeds. I'm 2 lakes in May and June. That July period hits. It's now midsummer. On clear bodies of water that are deep, you have a lot of 60, 50 feet of water. I might be fishing in 28, 30 feet of water on main lake rock. On the flowage this time of year, I might be fishing 12 feet of water on a long stump point that runs out into, you know, a basin. Versus a month ago on the flowage, I might have been in a weedy bay connected to this main point extension that runs out. So, you know, basically, I mean, it's all just relative to where you're fishing.
Yeah.
The body of water you're fishing.
In real simple terms, those fish kind of start up here shallow, and then they move out to the middle. And then as the water cools, they basically come back. Because I know musky-wise, I mean, we'll find fish in late September, early October, especially on the flowage, but it's everywhere. It's a pre-turnover on a natural lake that has a thermocline. On the flowage, there's no thermocline, but they still do that exact same thing. These fish will be shallower in late September and early October than they will be on opening weekend.
Or in July and August for sure.
Like absolutely. Yeah.
So to wrap this up, what is the biggest mistake you guys see? What is the biggest mistake you see people make when musky fishing on the flowage?
I would say it's fishing too slow, but also, I guess the word would be lingering in one spot for too long. You know, fish efficiently, fish quickly. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be burning a bucktail every day of the year, but you know, if you guys have been coming here for a long time, you should know the sweet spots on the spot, you know, and some days you have to fish the whole spot because there's fish crawling all over, but when fishing's tough, be more specific. Cover the good spots. It's better to hit 10 inside turns in 3 hours than it is to fish around all of Pete's Bar for 3 hours on most days. And what I mean by and that's kind of what I mean by lingering too, is don't linger within your pattern that you want the fish to be in. If the fish aren't biting in the weeds, get out of the weeds. If the fish aren't you know, eating topwaters after dark, well, get out in the middle of the day. And that's the number one thing I see people make mistakes with on the flowage. And what about for you? What's the number one mistake you see when it's
walleye fishing? Fishing too slow, guys throwing out too many anchors, too many guys sitting too still for too long, and too many guys fishing too deep. If I could give you guys one tip to catch more quality fish in the flowage, I'd say fish fast, put your boat in 12 feet of water, and don't go deeper than 13 feet. Doesn't really matter what time of year you're fishing, and you know, fish aggressively. The fish are going to tell you where they're at. And you know, if you catch a couple fish, go back on them and then fish a little bit slower. But fish fast, fish shallow, and the flowage is going to treat you a lot better on a multi-species front.
And Tom had a great point for muskies too. You know, once you find that pattern, then slow down and work the pattern. But until you find what's going on, be quick, be efficient, let the fish tell you what they want.
On a lake with this much vastness of structure, stumps, cribs, points, humps, weeds, bog tops, you know, everything.
Everything.
You have to fish fast to find fish for sure.
You do.
All right, well, thanks for tuning in this week, guys. How can people get a hold of you?
You can go to my website at peterichguide.com, and it has all my information, phone number, web, email address, anything you need there.
I'll go ahead and link that in the description below. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Absolutely subscribe to this channel. Watch any number of these 3 videos and stay tuned for more.